What President Trump is claiming is that even when a statute was properly adopted, signed by the president, a president gets another chance at veto through impoundment. Just yesterday, a federal district court in Washington, in speaking of President Trump's impoundment, said that not only was it imprudent for him to do this, but it was clearly unconstitutional.
Erwin, how is what Trump did with TikTok's a great example of that, different than President Obama saying Congress isn't doing anything on immigration? I'm going to unilaterally set up DACA. How is it different from after the courts kept turning Joe Biden away from forgiving student loans, that he kept trying new routes and then had another one that he put out just, at the very end of his term, which has since been invalidated. We have all these recent cases of presidents trying just unilaterally to do stuff, either because they don't like that Congress isn't doing what they want them to do, or they just think it's of a moral high ground that, they should find a way around a court ruling. How is this different?
It's enormously different because what President Trump is doing is violating the law. Let's take spending and then compare it to your examples. There's a federal statute, the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, that says that when Congress appropriates money by statute, the president is obligated to spend it. In fact, even before this statute, many courts said when Congress appropriates money by statute, the president doesn't have the power to choose not to spend it. Congress has the power of the purse. President Trump has violated the Impoundment Control Act and separation of powers by refusing to spend billions of dollars appropriated by Congress by federal law. Now compare that to your examples. When it came to President Obama and DACA, what President Obama said is, there are 11 million undocumented people in this country. We don't have the resources to try to apprehend and deport all of them. We're going to set priorities with regard to enforcement. And we're going to not deport those who are children who arrived who don't really have a place to go. This is classic prosecutorial discretion. Possessing a small amount of marijuana violates federal law, but the federal government has chosen not to enforce that law. President Trump can choose what criminal statutes to enforce or not, but that's very different than choosing not to spend money. In your example of President Biden and student loans is a sharp contrast. There's a federal statute called the HEROES Act that said that the Secretary of Education is allowed to, and specifically it says, to forgive student loans or to excuse payment of student loans in an emergency. President Biden claimed that he had the authority under the very text of the statute to be able to forgive the repayment of student loans. The Supreme Court in Biden versus Nebraska, June 30th, 2023, ruled against him, and the Biden administration complied with it. They then looked for other ways under the statute to forgive student loans. When courts said they couldn't, they complied with it. But there's a huge difference between looking for statutory authority, which is what Biden did in that instance, and violating explicit statutes, which is what Donald Trump's doing in refusing to spend money.
But isn't the argument that the Trump administration is making is that the spending that you're referring to has to be carried out through something that's under the executive branch control? And so to some extent, even though the money is authorized and designated by Congress, that the executive branch has some degree of latitude because is part of its check, it's carrying out the actual spending through these departments that are under executive control.
Courts have consistently rejected that argument, and there's a statute that rejects the argument. Richard Nixon tried making that argument. He said that he had the authority to refuse to spend money Congress appropriated and used the words that you did, that the president has to carry out the spending. Every court to rule on it, including the Supreme Court, and Train versus City of New York said that the president doesn't have the discretion to choose not to spend money that Congress has appropriated by statute. Congress then in 1974 passes the Impoundment Control Act to say the president has no authority to impound and refuse to spend money. 50 years have gone by. No other president has challenged that or tried to impound funds until Donald Trump. And so far, the federal courts have considered it, have consistently ruled against Trump and said he just didn't have that authority.
Do you think that if this gets to the Supreme Court, it likely would be in alignment with the lower federal courts, or is there a chance, given its precedents, that it might say it disagrees with the earlier precedent on this, that the president really needs to have more authority over the ultimate spending of this money? Congress doesn't have the right unilaterally as Congress to enjoin the president from controlling expenditures.
I think there are issues where Donald Trump is likely to win in the Supreme Court, and we can talk about some of them. I don't think that this is one of them, because under the Constitution, the power of the purse is given to Congress. The Congress isn't doing this unilaterally. When Congress passes a budget bill, the president can sign it or veto it. If Congress wants to, it can override a veto by two-thirds vote of both houses of Congress. What President Trump is claiming is that even when a statute was properly adopted, signed by the president, a president gets another chance at veto through impoundment. Just yesterday, a federal district court in Washington, in speaking of President Trump's impoundment, said that not only was it imprudent for him to do this, but it was clearly unconstitutional.